The date is August 29th, 1992, and within Wembley Stadium in London, over 78,000 fervent fans roar as two gladiators, Bret the Hitman Hart and the British Bulldog Davy Boy Smith, conclude what many would instantly hail as a masterpiece. It was a bout for the Intercontinental Championship, a title Bret Hart would lose that night, yet paradoxically, he had never felt more like a star. This was the moment, the seismic shift. For the first time, Vince McMahon, the architect of a wrestling empire built on titans, perceived Bret Hart not merely as a technician, a workhorse, or a tag team specialist, but as a genuine, undeniable main event star. The accolades were immediate and profound. Pro Wrestling Illustrated readers, the very pulse of the wrestling world, voted it the match of the year. The company itself, retrospectively acknowledging its historical significance, would later name it the greatest in the history of SummerSlam, and Bret Hart, years later upon his induction into the Hall of Fame, would cite this very contest as his favorite match of his illustrious career. This loss would set the stage for what would become his greatest victory. 3 months later, in a comparatively quiet, non-televised event in Saskatoon, Canada, Bret Hart would defeat Ric Flair to be crowned World Heavyweight Champion. He had finally made it to the summit, a place where most, including Vince McMahon himself, never truly believed he would ascend. But why? Why did it take 8 long, arduous years for Vince McMahon to finally relent and propel Bret Hart to the pinnacle? What was it about the Hitman that caused the notoriously astute McMahon to overlook his undeniable talent for so long? And what ultimately changed to such a profound degree that McMahon, ever the pragmatist, knew he had no choice but to acknowledge the inevitable and crown Bret Hart his champion? The answer lies not in a single revelation, but in a complex tapestry woven from the threads of company philosophy, deeply ingrained preferences, geopolitical shifts, and the relentless, undeniable force of Bret Hart's sheer, unadulterated excellence. Bret Hart's journey into the World Wrestling Federation began in 1984. A subtle transition from the gritty, independent Canadian wrestling scene of his family's Stampede Wrestling promotion. Initially, there were discussions, rather bizarre ones, about saddling him with a cowboy gimmick. Bret, ever the realist, flatly refused, quipping that in Calgary, if you called yourself a cowboy, you'd better be one. This early refusal, a quiet defiance of a conventional, often cartoonish mold, was perhaps an early indicator of a man who would carve his own path, albeit slowly. His televised debut on August 29, 1984, was a tag team match where he partnered with the Dynamite Kid against Iron Mike Sharp and Troy Alexander. A few weeks later, on September 11th in Poughkeepsie, New York, Hart secured his first televised singles victory against Aldo Marino. Soon he was slotted into the mid-card, a land of forgotten dreams and fleeting moments, alongside his brother-in-law, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. This union proved pivotal, solidifying the tag team that would become the Hart Foundation, a name exclusive to Bret, Neidhart, and their manager Jimmy Hart, due to their similar surnames. Bret's agile, technical style, which earned him the moniker the excellence of execution, created a compelling contrast with Neidhart's brute strength and brawling skills. During this period, Hart began wearing his signature mirrored sunglasses, initially to mask his nervousness during promos, a weakness he openly admitted in his early career. Even as this duo, with their distinctive pink and black attire, began to gain traction, capturing their first tag team championship on February 7, 1987, by defeating the British Bulldogs, the perception was clear. Neidhart's imposing look and the boisterous managerial antics of Jimmy Hart were considered the primary selling points. Their victory at WrestleMania 3, teaming with Danny Davis against the Bulldogs and Tito Santana, further solidified their heel status. Yet despite an impressive singles program against Ricky Steamboat, Bret's individual recognition lagged. Vince McMahon, in his infinite wisdom, or perhaps his stubborn myopia, viewed Bret as too quiet, too technical, and too small. He wasn't a true Federation guy. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't oversized. He didn't shout. He didn't ooze charisma in the conventional bombastic sense that McMahon championed. He was, to Vince, a workhorse. And Vince McMahon famously didn't build WrestleManias around workhorses. The fundamental Federation formula of the 1980s and early 90s was deceptively simple: muscles over mechanics. Vince McMahon had shrewdly identified the market and capitalized on the burgeoning fitness craze, presenting larger-than-life superhero physiques to a captivated audience. In this landscape, anyone under 6 feet 2 inches or 240 pounds had to perform twice the labor to garner half the recognition. It was a visual medium, and McMahon believed characters, often defined by their exaggerated physical presence, were what sold tickets and merchandise, not the intricate artistry of a wrestling match. Bret Hart, for all his undeniable skill, was perceived as too vanilla. He was a utility player, a reliable hand, but certainly not a franchise star. He suffered a high-profile loss to Macho Man Randy Savage on Saturday night's main event in November 1987. He was also the first entrant in the inaugural Royal Rumble match in January 1988, lasting over 25 minutes before being eliminated by Don Muraco, a respectable but ultimately non-winning performance. At WrestleMania 4, he was one of the final 2 participants in a 20-man battle royal, only to be betrayed and eliminated by Bad News Brown, initiating a feud that saw Neidhart side with Bret after a falling out with Jimmy Hart. His role for years was to elevate others. He was the quintessential professional, always making his opponents look good, always delivering a stellar performance, regardless of his position on the card. He put over other stars, often finding himself overshadowed in grander Royal Rumble spectacles and WrestleMania moments. The Hart Foundation would reclaim the Tag Team Championship at SummerSlam 1990, defeating Demolition in a 2-out-of-3 falls match, a significant victory, but their reign would end at WrestleMania 7 against the Nasty Boys, signaling the end of the legendary tag team. Digging deeper into what held him back, several immovable stones stood in Bret's path. The first was his Canadian roots. In the patriotic fervor of the Reagan era, where the Federation narrative often leaned into an America against the world dynamic, Vince naturally preferred American hometown heroes like Hulk Hogan. Bret, while respected for his skill, wasn't a flag-waving patriot babyface in the mold McMahon envisioned for his top stars. His heritage, though never explicitly a barrier, subtly limited his perceived mass appeal in the American market. Then there was the perception of his personality. Bret was, by his own admission, shy and soft-spoken, especially in his early career. He wasn't the boisterous, mic-dropping showman that McMahon believed moved merchandise and captivated audiences. Vince simply didn't see the fire, not in the promos, not in the charisma metrics of the day. Bret himself acknowledged his struggles with microphone work in those initial years. While his in-ring work spoke volumes, McMahon's paradigm demanded a louder, more overt form of self-promotion. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, was Vince's entrenched loyalty to his established older stars. Bret was consistently passed over, first during Hogan's seemingly endless reign, and then again during the ascendance of Ultimate Warrior. Bret was always dependable, a rock-solid performer who could be counted on to deliver, but in Vince's eyes, dependability simply wasn't enough to warrant the top spot. He was a valuable asset, but not the chosen one, not the larger-than-life figure McMahon had cultivated for so long. Yet a turning point loomed, almost imperceptible at first, but ultimately unavoidable. The early 1990s brought increased scrutiny on steroid use in professional wrestling, an issue that would ultimately culminate in the infamous federal trial against Vince McMahon himself. This external pressure forced McMahon to reevaluate his deeply ingrained philosophy, subtly shifting focus away from the muscle-bound behemoths who had defined his empire. Suddenly, Bret Hart's clean-cut, athletic and naturally muscular physique became an asset, not a limitation. He represented a cleaner, more wholesome image. Bret Hart had no scandal, no baggage, no bloated physique. He was real, relatable. And when Vince desperately needed a new kind of hero, a fresh face for a changing landscape, Bret was right there, waiting. A diamond in the rough McMahon had overlooked for years. His individual breakout came with his first Intercontinental Championship at SummerSlam 1991, an absolute classic against Mr. Perfect, submitting him with the sharpshooter in a match that truly showcased his excellence of execution. This victory was followed by his win at the 1991 King of the Ring tournament, further cementing his singles credentials. He successfully defended the title against opponents like Skinner at this Tuesday in Texas. The championship, however, was briefly lost to the Mountie in January 1992, in a surprising turn. But this paved the way for another significant singles match. At WrestleMania 8, Bret defeated his distant relative, Rowdy Roddy Piper, to reclaim the Intercontinental Championship in a brutal technical clinic. He would even defeat Shawn Michaels in the Federation's first-ever ladder match on a Wrestling Challenge taping in July 1992, a groundbreaking contest that highlighted his innovation. Next came the aforementioned and long-awaited SummerSlam in London, England, and the opponent, his brother-in-law Davey Boy Smith, a fitting adversary for an emotional, high-stakes encounter. Vince McMahon booked Bret to lose the Intercontinental title in the main event, a decision that, on paper, seemed to confirm his perpetual role as an excellent, yet ultimately secondary player. But the crowd reaction, an electrifying almost 80,000 strong at Wembley Stadium, told a profoundly different story. They were captivated by the technical brilliance, the emotional depth, the undeniable storytelling unfolding before their eyes. Bret's ability to craft a narrative in the ring, particularly with a dazed Davey Boy in the latter half of the match, proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he could carry the drama at the highest level, on the biggest stage. The audience was not just appreciating a match, they were experiencing a moment. This was the moment Vince could no longer ignore. 3 months later, the understated coronation took place. Ric Flair, a man synonymous with championship gold, dropped the World Heavyweight Championship to Bret in a non-televised match in Saskatoon, Canada, on October 12, 1992. It was sudden, it was understated, and perhaps even then, Vince wasn't entirely sure. He didn't make a grand announcement, no fanfare for the new era. But the truth was undeniable. Bret Hart had finally claimed the company's top spot. Bret's ascent from that point was swift and undeniable. He immediately defended his new title against formidable challengers such as Kamala and Papa Shango. His first pay-per-view defense as champion was a hard-fought victory against Shawn Michaels at the 1992 Survivor Series, a precursor to their infamous future rivalry. And then, with his successful defense against Razor Ramon at the 1993 Royal Rumble, the now iconic tagline, "The best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be," was firmly solidified. He became unequivocally the people's champion. Not Vince's chosen one, but the champion chosen by the fans, by those who recognized genuine talent and heartfelt effort over manufactured hype. Slowly, inexorably, Vince McMahon, the man who once dismissed him as too small and too vanilla, could no longer ignore the groundswell of support, the undeniable quality, and the sheer, unyielding excellence of Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret broke the mold, not by conforming to it, but by excelling within it to such a degree that the mold itself had to change around him. Even Vince McMahon, the man who once saw him as nothing more than a reliable tag guy, was ultimately compelled to admit that Bret Hart was championship material, that he was indeed the best. He would go on to win the World Championship a total of 5 times before his controversial departure from the company, establishing himself as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, a technical marvel and a genuine fan favorite. Vince McMahon didn't believe in Bret Hart. Not at first, but in the end, Bret made him believe. As the man himself might have said, "You can't always pick your moments. Sometimes the moment picks you." For Bret Hart, his moment, 8 years in the making, finally arrived, forever altering the landscape of professional wrestling.